All right, moving along then in Thomas Pynchon's novel, The Crying of Lot 49. We're up to chapter 3 now, which is longer than either of the first two. Looks like each chapter has gotten longer. I think chapter 2 is about 10 pages longer than the first one. This one's about twice its length and quite a bit complex. This is where things get very Pynchonian in this particular chapter, where Oedipa is first introduced to the Trastero, which is a... for those of you who don't know, the Trastero is a rival organization to the post office that Pynchon has invented. That has apparently, as we'll find out here in this chapter, been around for centuries, at least since the 17th century, as a rival underground organization for the praetorite to communicate, those who have been passed over by society, those who have fallen through the chinks of society. So as it starts out, it references the Trastero and also references Pierce Inveraredy's stamp collection. And then she receives this letter from her husband, Mucho Mas, who just sends her a letter. Pynchon doesn't tell us what the contents of the letter are, but he does point to this one little odd detail about the envelope where it says, report all obscene mail to your potsmaster. First of all, I guess in the 50s they were, before all the obscenity trials had been worked through with Naked Lunch and the Hustler magazine, before all that had been worked out, they were still actually going after people sending obscene material through the mail. What a fucking waste of time. And then potsmaster, not postmaster. And she asks Metzger, what's a potsmaster? And he makes a joke and he says, it's a guy in the scullery in charge of all the heavy stuff, canner kettles, gunboats, Dutch ovens. So he makes a light out of it. But it's odd that it's this little detail. Might be a misprint. Of course, nothing in Pynchon is accidental, as we'll find out. So they go to this bar, her and Metzger now, go to a bar called The Scope, which is a place where a lot of the electronics employees from the Yoyodyne plant like to hang out. And when they go in there, they're playing on the jukebox, a Karl-Heinz Stockhausen electronic composition on the jukebox. And then they sit at the bar. And then they meet this strange guy named Mike Fallopian, who's a member of something that he calls the Peter Pingwood Society. And so when she asks, who's that? And he gives her the background on this, that apparently during the Civil War, I think this is in 1861, Commodore Pingwood was from the South and it had this plan to sail a group of ships around the Cape of Horn to launch an assault on San Francisco. So he did this, but he lost his ships along the way, and his ship was the only one that survived. I think it was called the, I lost what it was called, and the Disgruntled. And then, but by the time he gets to San Francisco, Pynchon has made this part up, but by the time he gets to San Francisco, there are Russian ships that have put in near the harbor at San Francisco. That is apparently historical. And then Fallopian says that there may or may not have been shots exchanged. He's not sure. But in any event, Commodore Pingwood just drifted down the coast. He's anti-industrialist, and that's what Fallopian likes about him, is his anti-industrialism. And but he ends up just settling in California and becoming a speculator in real estate, a little bit like a proto-version of Pierce Inveraredy. And Oedipa laughs at this. But now the puzzling thing is about this is that the Peter Pingwood Society may be yet another rival to the post office and another kind of Trastero. Pynchon does not make it clear here because there's some ambiguity in which he receives a letter. A guy comes in, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and a guy comes in with a mail sack. And she's like, who's this? And he's like, must be Yoyodyne, some sort of inner office mail system that they use. And he gets up, stands up on the bar, and starts handing out these letters. Meanwhile, she excuses herself to go to the ladies' room. And then while she's in there, she notices written on the wall is the following. It reads like something off of Craigslist. Interested in sophisticated fun? You, hubby, girlfriends, the more the merrier. Get in touch with Kirby through Waste only. Waste is capitalized. Box 7391, LA. Waste, Oedipa wondered? WASTE is an acronym that stands for We Await Silent Tristero's Empire. So it's connected with the Tristero. And then beneath it, she sees the symbol for the Tristero, which is that little muted, it's a muted post horn. So it's a horn, and you can see that it's also both phallic on the one hand and vaginal on the other. But then the vaginal part of it is closed up with another part that mutes it. And it reminds me a little bit of the opposition that Jean Gebser points out in the ever-present origin between the etymology of the word myth, which is related to both mouth, hence the oral traditions of myth and the speaking and utterances, but it's also related to the word mute. The silent muses, or the ones who are silent, or that about which certain things regarding the mysteries must not be spoken of. Wittgenstein's Tractatus ends with that too. Certain things we cannot speak of, certain transcendent things. And so there's a kind of almost an oxymoron there with the horn is, of course, Gabriel's horn from the Apocalypse. So there's an apocalyptic dimension to the Tristero here, but also this idea that there's silence. It's almost like a warning. If you know about the Tristero, you don't talk about it or else. That seems to be the warning of the muted post horn, like a hand over the mouth. So she comes out of the restroom and she notices that Mike Fallopian has received one of these letters from the guy who has come in delivering supposed inter-office mail. It doesn't have a stamp on it or a postmark, and instead of that, all it has in the corner is, it says PPS, which would stand for Peter Pingwood Society. So somehow, this is what makes the reader think this is a separate organization from the Tristero, but we're not sure. And he unfolds the letter and reads it to her, and all it says is, "Dear Mike," it said, "how are you? Just thought I'd drop you a note. How's your book coming? Guess that's all for now. See you at the Scope." So this is the kind of communication that the internet has later taken over. Twitter in particular is known for this, using what's called by communications theorists phatic communication. That's P-H-A-T-I-C. Phatic communication is just chatter. It's just communication for the sake of communication. It doesn't necessarily convey any important information. It's just when you walk outside your house and you walk up the street to go get coffee and you say hello to 5 people that you've known in the neighborhood. It's just social, like birds chirping in the trees. It's just social chatter. And the Tristero seems to be funneling this kind of communication through this underground mail system. And it turns out that, so she says, what book does the letter refer to? And Fallopian says, "Oh, I've been working on a book about the history of the U.S. Post Office, especially tracking rivals to it, private mail delivery in the U.S., attempting to link the Civil War to the postal reform movement that began around 1845. And so during the 19th century, from about 1845 down to the Civil War, the United States Post Office consolidated its monopoly on the delivery of mail and made it illegal for any other couriers to deliver mail under heavy financial penalties. So the Tristero is an organization that has existed to rival it. So that's it for this scene with Mike Fallopian in the bar called the Scope. And then the next day, they're out back at a place called, back at the estate that we saw earlier with Pierce Inverarity that he had invested in, this housing development, where we have this thing called Fangoso Lagoons. That's what the estate's called, Fangoso Lagoons. But there's a lagoon in the center of it. And in chapter, chapter 2 here, where Pynchon described it? In chapter 2, he actually describes the estate itself. On came a loud commercial that comes on the TV that she and Metzger were watching the night they met for Fangoso Lagoons, a new housing development west of here. One of Inverarity's interests, Metzger noted. It was to be laced by canals with private landings for power boats, a floating social hall in the middle of an artificial lake, at the bottom of which lay restored galleons imported from the Bahamas, Atlantean fragments of columns and friezes from the Canaries, real human skeletons from Italy. Keep that thought in mind. Giant clamshells from Indonesia, all for the entertainment of scuba enthusiasts. And so it's one of these, again, one of these Baudrillardian hyper-real places that has created a simulacra to entertain American superficial, shallow sensibilities. But the bones at the bottom of the lake are what interest Oedipa in this chapter, as they go back out and they meet Metzger's friend Manny Depresso, the lawyer turned actor who played him in a mini-series that never got picked up. And so he meets him, and he's out there at the marina. There's a boat there, and Manny Depresso's on the boat, and the paranoids show up, and they show up along with Metzger and Oedipa and their girlfriends, and they all climb onto this boat that Manny Depresso appears to own, but he's looking around very furtively, and he sees a couple of guys in gray-suited business suits coming frantically down the shore toward them. He's like, "Hurry, everyone, get on!" And he basically steals the boat, and they go out on the lake, and then they go to this little island where there's like a little fake town hall simulacra thing. So they go to this island, and then the paranoids are having fun. They have a picnic with their girlfriends, and they're getting stoned. And Depresso then proceeds to tell Oedipa about let's see here, the whole thing with the bones. He says, yeah, so now in Verardi, another commercial had come on the television in that second chapter when Metzger and Oedipa were playing around watching the show about the little submarine, My Daddy, My Doggy, and Me. And another commercial for Beaconsfield cigarettes had come on, and Metzger had said, Inverarity owns interests in Beaconsfield cigarettes, and the charcoal in the filters are supposedly made from human bones, and that's curious. So Depresso brings this up, and he tells them, "Oh well, Inverarity bought those bones from my client right now, who's a mob guy, a Cosa Nostra guy named Tony Jaguar, and this is the guy who sold him all those bones, some of which are at the bottom of the lagoon that they're on an island on, that have been placed down there at the bottom of Fangosa lagoons for more realism. And Jaguar had gotten them from when he was in the war. He was fighting on the side of the Italians, of course. And he was in the war, and he found out about this area on a lake called Lago Pietà, which was probably not a real lake. And a group of GIs, American GIs, were massacred, and then their bodies were thrown into this lake. And Jaguar knew that the bodies were there, and later he went back with the idea that Americans will pay money for anything, including relics from World War II. Let's dig up those bodies and see what we got. By that point, all the flesh is gone from the body, so it's just a bunch of bones, a lot of bones. So he harvests all these bones out of this lake, looks for some way, somehow to sell them, passes them from one warehouse to another, and finally it comes across Beaconsfield Cigarettes, or a firm that they have working for them that acquires the bones. And Pearson Variety, of course, has interests in Beaconsfield Cigarettes, and so the charcoal from the filters are apparently made from these bones. Now, one of the girls, one of the groupies, overhears them talking about this, and she says, "Oh, that sounds like the play that's going on in town. There's a Jacobean revenge play called The Couriers Tragedy by Richard Warfinger that they've been putting on every night down at the playhouse called The Tank." And Manny Depresso's like, what are you listening in on our stuff for? And she's like, "Oh, we're always stoned. Don't worry. We don't pass information along. We don't care." So Oedipa decides, because there's a reference to bones at the bottom of a lake in this play, she decides she wants to go see it with Metzger. So she drags Metzger along the next night to go see this play, which is now a play within a play. Last time in chapter 2 we had seen Pynchon making fun of Disney movies with the My Daddy, My Doggy, and Me story about the submarine and the doggy drowning and the kid getting electrocuted at the end. And now here he makes fun of the 17th century Jacobean revenge play. The Jacobean period comes in after the Elizabethan, after the Shakespeare period is done. Then we get the Jacobean period, and they are famous for their very bloody, violent revenge plays. John Webster's Duchess of Malfi is the archetype there, the primary paradigm for that whole genre, the Revenger's tale, tragedy rather, the Revenger's tragedy, and 'Tis Pity She's a Whore. There's a few of them. So it's called the Courier's Tragedy. Courier, keep that in mind, and it's very convoluted. I'll see how much of it I can remember here. As it begins, then we have, so Pynchon now in this play, and it functions, the play functions in a way like the play does in Hamlet, the play called The Mousetrap, where Shakespeare invents this play within a play that mirrors and condenses the main themes of Hamlet. Here, Pynchon does a similar thing with this play, The Couriers Tragedy, and he sets up a difference engine between these two different principalities, one of Squamulia, if such a place exists, I don't know, and the other one, Fagio, at least I'm presuming it's pronounced that way and not Fagio, but with Pynchon, you never know. So these two houses are at war with each other, and that sets up another one of Pynchon's metaphysical bivalent ontologies, one of his difference engines, that will end with maximum thermodynamic equilibrium as the two houses wipe each other out completely, and only one character survives at the end of the play, who is named appropriately Gennaro, whose name is meant to remind you of generic. And he's wearing a gray flannel outfit at the end of the play. He represents maximum entropy. There's no more potential left for activation of the system. And this is a novel about entropy. Entropy as it gains in society, can it be reversed? It can't be reversed in physical systems, but human systems are not physical systems. So the human being has the potential for reversing entropy. So that's the question that Pynchon is raising in this whole novel. So Angelo then, as the play begins, is the evil Duke of Squamulia, and he has recently, about 10 years before the play opens up, murdered the Duke of Fagio, whose name we do not know, by poisoning the feet of an icon, an image of Saint Narcissus, that Duke had been in the habit of kissing every morning, and so he kisses it one day and it poisons him, which, by the way, there had been a reference at the beginning of chapter 2, and this tells you how Pynchon thinks through every single detail. Nothing is random. At the beginning of the chapter there, Mucho Mas was whistling to a new recording by Sick Dick and the Volkswagens called I Want to Kiss Your Feet. It kind of sounds like I Want to Hold Your Hand, the Beatles song that was popular at the time, but is clearly a reference to this play here. So that's what he does. And then we have these two characters on opposing sides. Niccolo, who is a relative of the dead Duke from Fagio, and he's the good guy in the play, as Pynchon points out for us handily. And Pasquale, who is the nephew of Angelo. Now, Angelo wants to marry his sister off to Pasquale for political reasons, except for two problems. Francesca is Angelo's sister, and they have been having sex for a long time, so they're guilty of incest. And the other problem is that Francesca is Pasquale's mother, which would be another incestuous, hence Oedipus' name, I guess, the whole theme of incest running through the novel. So that's what he wants to do. And he's like, Francesca says, the church is never going to approve that. He's like, I'll bribe a cardinal. Well, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. But he wants revenge over the house of Fagio. And Niccolo has been hanging out in disguise in Squamulia. And there had been plans on the part of the Duke to kill him by tricking him into playing a game of hide and seek with one of the characters, with Pasquale, and having him hide in a cannon and then have a guy light the cannon and blow him away. Out in a bloody rain to feed our fields amid the Maenad roar of Nitor's song and Sulphur's cantus firmus, as Pynchon parodies the sort of diction of that time. But a likable schemer named Ercole finds out about it and has a goat substituted instead. And Ercole has sympathies with dissident groups within Fagio, so he becomes a sort of friend of Niccolo. But then there's another friend named Domenico who turns out not to be a friend, and Niccolo makes the mistake of informing this guy, telling him who he is. And so Domenico then goes to Angelo, spilling Niccolo's secret, and then the first act ends with them finding out about this, with Niccolo's and Ercole finding out about it, and Ercole has Domenico tortured to death in every conceivable manner that you can think of, especially by ripping out his tongue, putting it on the end of a brand and lighting it on fire. In other words, a tongue of flame, which is Pynchon making fun of the Pentecost myth with the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost in tongues of flame that confer on each of the apostles a different language so they can go spread the gospel. So they torture that guy to death. And then, so the play then moves on, and it's very convoluted, but what happens is that Niccolo is working as a courier for the Thurn and Taxis aristocracy, who had, historically speaking, had a monopoly over the postal service in Europe at this time. So they were the primary postal service. Angelo has a private courier named Vittorio, but he decides, he's heard that Gennaro, who is the interim duke, meanwhile, Niccolo is the rightful heir to the throne of Fagio, but he's in hiding, and so Gennaro comes in as the interim duke, and he's planning to launch an invasion from Fagio against Squamiglia, and Angelo hears about this, so he writes out a letter in which, for the first time, he hints at that the ink that he's using to write the letter has a sinister origin, and later we find out that, here again, the ink has been made from a regiment called the Lost Guard of Fagio, and there are 50 of them, significantly. There's that Pentecostal number again, 50, who were from Fagio, and they were out near this lake when they just mysteriously disappeared. But their bones went into the lake, and ink was made from their bones, and the ink is what Angelo is using as he smiles leeringly to himself, as though he's the only one in the know about the ink, as he writes this letter to be sent to Gennaro to forestall the invasion, and trying to pretend that he's friendly. So Niccolo, he decides he doesn't want to use his private courier Vittorio because he doesn't trust him. So he decides to use Niccolo. He doesn't know who he is, obviously, who's working for Thurn and Taxis, and he sends him out. And so Niccolo is out, and he reads the letter. He opens it. He pauses by the lake. He reads the letter, and as he's reading it, there's a reference to now the Tristero, whose name none of the characters in the play want to pronounce. And in this scene, 3 Tristero assassins show up out of the woods, I guess. They're all dressed in black, wearing hoods over their faces, and they show up and they kill Niccolo, hence the Couriers Tragedy. So they kill him, and there had been a reference in Angelo's letter to them. He that we last is Thurn and Taxis knew, now recks no lord but the stiletto's thorn, and tacit lies the gold once knotted horn. No hallowed skein of stars can ward, I trow, who's once been set his tryst with Tristero. So the Tristero go back at least to the 17th century, is what Oedipa is learning as she's watching this play. So Niccolo's dead, and then Gennaro launches his invasion, and then pretty much the two houses completely wipe each other out. Gennaro is the last man standing at the end of the play, and we have thermodynamic equilibrium with his standing there. Generic Gennaro with his gray suit. And then, so the play ends, and the lights come up. And she's sitting there with Metzger, who's basically bored by this. And she says, I want to go backstage and talk to the director, Richard Driblette, more about those bones, because they were only referenced very cryptically. And I'd like to know, because it's very odd that this play would have this thing about the bones and the Lost Regiment in the water, when in the previous day, what's his name, Manny Depresso had just informed her about Inverardi buying these bones from dead American GIs in Italy at this Lake Pietà. So she wants to go backstage. He's like, go ahead, I'll wait for you. So she goes back to meet Richard Driblette. She never gets around to asking about the bones. He's in there taking a shower, and instead she says, hey, do you have a copy of that script? I really enjoyed the production. I'd like to read it. He's like, oh, yeah, maybe they're in the file cabinet. And she looks in the file cabinet, but none of the scripts are readable. They're all ink stained and coffee stained and badly photocopied. They're just not readable. She says, do you have the original script? He's like, no, not anymore. But it was made, I photocopied it from an anthology of Jacobean revenge plays called Jacobean Revenge Plays, I believe. And she's like, well, do you have that book? And he says, no, somebody took it during one of the parties but I seem to remember that there was another copy at Zapp's used bookstore. Do you know where he's at? Go there and you can probably find a copy of it. And then he's talking about, so why are you interested in all this? And she's like, did Richard Warfinger in his original play, as he wrote it, did he have these assassins come on stage, or was that your invention? He says, oh no, that was my invention. I just threw that in there for dramatic effect. It's not in Warfinger's play. And she's like, so why did you feel that you had to make these innovations? And he's like, it's just what theater directors do. You know, all of this has come out of my head. I don't know why you people, I guess referring to English majors or whoever, are always so interested in the word, in the original text. Now, Derrida would call this the Logocentrism of the West, which privileges the authority of the voice over the text. And the voice takes precedence over the text in Derrida's analysis of the West because it's closer to archai. It's closer to origin. So the closer to origin you can get, the metaphysics of the West go, the closer you're getting to the aura of authenticity of the original. Hence, this has driven the West mania for first editions ever since. And so Triblat is sort of standing in the shower grilling her about this. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous. You could spend your whole life, all you Puritans who love the text, and you're just obsessed with words, 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 even though the Puritans never even went to plays because they regarded them as immoral. And he sort of grills her. And he's like, well, you could fall in love with me. You could talk to my shrink, hide a tape recorder in my bedroom, see what I talk about from wherever I am when I sleep. You want to do that? You can put together clues, develop a thesis or several about why characters reacted to the Trastero possibility the way they did, why the assassins came on, why the black costumes. You could waste your life that way and never touch the truth. Warfinger supplied words and a yarn. I gave them life. That's it. And in a way, you sense that Pynchon is making fun of Pynchonites, English scholars who salivate over every last word of a Thomas Pynchon novel and just study, oh, what did Pynchon mean here by this part and that part? And he's already aware with his second novel that he's going to generate an industry. As Joyce said of his own books, I will generate a scholarship industry that will keep these guys busy for centuries. And he was 100% correct about that. Same thing with Pynchon. And that's pretty much how the chapter ends, with her leaving, getting back into the car with Metzger, and her realizing that they're picking up KCUF down from Kinneret, and she can hear the DJ on there is her husband Mucha, actually. And she's cheating on him with Metzger, so keep that in mind. So that's where we're at as Pynchon introduces us to this mysterious shadowy organization called the Trastero, this shadow organization that not only is a benign rival to the post office, but also apparently has its one foot in blood as well, since we saw in the play how it had a history of sending out assassins as well, hence the ominous muted horn, just like the ancients used to warn about in the mystery cults, especially the Eleusinian mysteries. You do not speak of these mysteries, as the Tom Cruise character learns in Stanley Kubrick's last film, Eyes Wide Shut. If you speak about these mysteries, and here it's a revival of this Bacchanalian Dionysian sex cult, grave things will happen to you. And he's warned about it, and he doesn't listen. So he and his family are in danger. They're being followed around by this organization. He narrowly escapes with his life, only by the intervention of the Sidney Pollack character, who intervenes on his behalf, since he owes him a favor for saving the prostitute's life at the beginning of the film. So something like that. You do not speak of the mysteries. And generally this remained true. We know that a lot of famous writers, Greek writers and so forth, Aristotle, I believe, was one of them, were initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, and not a word. We don't know anything about their actual content. All we can do is assemble what we know about it from clues, as Carl Karenyi does, for example, in his wonderful book on Eleusis. And so that brings us up to speed with the introduction of the Trastero organization, which now may or may not exist. This may all be in Oedipa's head, and if it is, then this casts her in the role of a stencil, the stencil character from V that we saw, looking for this huge conspiracy around this woman named V. Here the conspiracy now has shifted to the Trastero, which may or may not exist. And so we'll leave it there with about the halfway point of the novel.